The following program, The Russ Belville Show, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate to the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity and encourage all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers on The Russ Belville Show are their own, and The Russ Belville Show cannot be held legally responsible for their validity or reliability. Viewer discretion is advised. The Prohibition Opposition Television Network, brought to you by the National Cannabis Coalition.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The Prohibition Opposition Television Network presents The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the middle of the week, folks. It is Thursday, June 7th, 2012, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Boy, do we have plenty of stuff to cover in the next 2 hours. I'm glad you could join me here to get it all covered. And, of course, joining us here in the studio on camera, too, we have the pirate himself, Ganja John, hanging out. How you doing,
What's up,
John?
Russ? I did not adjust my camera, so I'm leaning over kind of thing.
Just pull the whole mic that way, and the camera will go with it. Oh, yeah. So we got Ganja John here. How's things going in Ganja John land?
They're going good. Ganja wife got back into town last night after being gone for 8 days, so we just had lunch.
Oh,
and,
fantastic.
Had a good time.
Glad to hear it. Also joining us from our virtual studio in Grastoria, Oregon, we have our news director, Cannabis Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Russ. Hi, Ganja John. How are you guys doing today?
Doing fantastic. I'm loving hearing the Daily Cannabis Chronicle every day. We replay it at the top of every hour, just like a real network news station. And Carrie, thank you for doing those headlines for us.
Sure, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I like the new format. I'm digging it, man.
All right. Well, what do we have in the news today?
Today, big news day, I think, anyway. First of all, Senator Kerry, you remember Senator Kerry from Nebraska. He kind of makes a statement about national medical marijuana. We also have a California court ruling about the American with Disabilities Act and whether that doesn't cover medical marijuana patients. But the big news today, Eric Holder was held under the fire today and questioned about the dispensary raids and the Fast and Furious program. We're going to give you his answers first up on today's Cannabis Chronicles.
All right, we'll take a look at that. Also coming up on today's show, we've got our Groovin' Thursday Daily Toker Tunes. And Ganja John, you got a tune for us today? You looking one up?
I am looking one up. We have a few pod-safe artists that we can use, so I'm picking one on the fly today. It'll be a surprise for all of us.
All right, fantastic. Good to hear it. And also coming up on today's show, we are going to be visiting with Titus Peterson. He's a former lead felony prosecutor in Denver, Colorado. He's with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and he is going to be talking about his experiences prosecuting marijuana crimes and why he says now, legalize all drugs. It'll be a great discussion. And then at the end of the show, I've got time for a radical rant. We're going to talk a little bit about the article that I briefly touched on in hour 2 yesterday. Ches Pazienza was writing in the Huffington Post a piece called Reefer Madness, and he was referring to a CNN contributor, both of whom are saying that those of us who are fighting for marijuana legalization need to take a reality check, that it's not the most important issue in the world and that all we really want to do is get high. I'm going to give you my opinions on that. And actually, Chaz responded to my response in the Huffington Post. I posted my blog in the Huffington Post this morning. He's already responded to it, and so I'll go back and forth between the two posts and give you my take on the issue. Also, we'll be taking it into hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. We'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. We are sponsored by the National Cannabis Coalition. You can find out more at nationalcannabiscoalition.com, and you can text Russ to 420-420 to show your support for this show on our new sponsor, the National Cannabis Coalition. Coming up next week, we should be ad-free on live stream and coming to you from a brand new high-def platform. So we'll give you more details on that in hour 2 as well. Stick around. We are going to be right back after these messages. You're listening to The Russ Belville Show on RadicalRuss.com. Visit our Facebook page at The Russ Belville Show.
It's simply business. It's simply business. It's simply business. You know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Brought to you by the National Cannabis Coalition.
It's simply business. It's simply business. It's simply business. You know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business. It's simply business. You know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
Help us legalize it. Text NCC to 420-420 and send $10 to the National Cannabis Coalition. The Russ Belville Show, providing dictionaries to drug czars since 2009. Ganja John, freaking out stoner comedian since 2011. Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, ganja sacrament, consumer cannabis. The topic of marijuana is heating up the news, and the Russ Belville Show catches you up with today's latest headlines. Now, here's our senior news editor, Cannabis Carey, with the Daily Cannabis Chronicle.
Today, United States Attorney General Eric Holder said that the Obama administration is only targeting dispensaries that have exceeded state laws and that he's still trying to find accountability in the errors under Operation Fast and Furious. Attorney General Holder was in a House Judiciary Committee oversight hearing this morning when he told committee members, quote, "We limit our enforcement efforts to those individual organizations that are acting out of conformity with state law." That response was in answer to Representative Gerald Nadler from New York, who was questioning Holder about the administration's medical marijuana policies. Representative Nadler has sponsored a medical marijuana bill in the state of New York, and during his 2008 campaign, Obama promised to make marijuana use a lower priority and not to waste government resources prosecuting medical marijuana cases. When the first few DEA raids happened during his tenure, the White House said it was just a holdover from the previous administration's policies. In October of 2009, the Holder memo was put out to provide clarification and guidance to federal prosecutors in medical marijuana states. It asked them to not focus on individuals using medical marijuana in compliance with existing state laws. The memo also stated that, quote, "Prosecution of commercial enterprises that unlawfully market and sell marijuana for profit continues to be an enforcement priority of the department." Now, activists and entrepreneurs interpreted that memo to mean that if they were following state laws, they would not be targeted by federal authorities. That has not been the case. Holder said that the recent raids in Colorado and California were because the medical marijuana distribution centers were near schools. Now, Holder was also pressured about Operation Fast and Furious, a program where DEA agents were letting weapons freely move across the U.S.-Mexican border called gun walking in hopes of pinning future charges on drug gang leaders. He was answering to the charge by committee chairman Lamar Smith that the Obama administration had, quote, "shown a disregard for the U.S. Constitution and the rule of law in an effort to impose their agenda on the American people." Smith said that efforts to block congressional inquiries about the administration's action in Operation Fast and Furious are an attempt to hide those responsible for the decisions that led to the death of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry by a rifle purchased with knowledge under the Fast and Furious operation. He also accused the Justice Department of refusing to comply with congressional subpoenas to find out why the program was ever authorized and who had knowledge of the inappropriate tactics. Holder and Congressman Darrell Issa had a heated exchange about the Fast and Furious program this morning. Issa and others are wanting more accountability over just who authorized this dangerous and ultimately deadly plan. The Justice Department has admitted to having over 140,000 internal documents that reference the operation, but they have only handed over 7,600 of them to a congressional investigator.
You know, I was a talk radio host on XM Satellite during the waning years of the Bush administration, and I remember liberals and progressives and people who would otherwise consider themselves to be left of center railing against President George W. Bush for some of the things he did during his administration. But strangely, I find those people are silent when we start talking about Operation Fast and Furious and some of the other actions of the Obama administration. I'll come back to Fast and Furious in just a second. I want to get to that first point where Holder now, Attorney General Holder, wants to make the excuse that, we're only going after these dispensaries in these medical marijuana states where they're not complying with state law. Well, gosh, where is that in the Constitution, Mr. Holder, where the federal government has the right to decide whether state laws are being followed? I was looking at the Constitution all day today, and I forgot that clause. I forget whether it's in Article 1, Article 2, where is that at, Attorney General Holder? I mean, you are the Attorney General. You ought to know. Can you point me to that part of the Constitution that says the Attorney General's office of the federal government of the United States of America is in charge of deciding whether or not some guy running a dispensary in Los Angeles or in Helena, Montana, or in Seattle, Washington is properly following his or her state laws? Because I don't believe that's in the Constitution, Mr. Attorney General. I believe you're deciding on your own what you think are the violations of state laws, rather than letting the states tell you that. That excuse might wash if, say, the Attorney General of California or Montana had contacted your office and said, please, federal government, DEA, help us out. These guys here running this dispensary are violating state law. But that's not happened. That has not happened. It's still being discussed. After 16 years in California, they're still trying to figure out what exactly is legal or illegal under state law. But you want to come down from the federal level with your thugs and decide for them what is violating state law or not. And it's mainly just because you don't like the idea of people other than your friends in Big Pharma making money off of the sale of drugs. Like any good drug dealer, you're just trying to protect your turf. Now, back to this Fast and Furious thing. This scandal, I'm telling you, if this had happened under the Bush administration, there'd be liberals, progressives out front of the White House daily protesting this. This is the federal government knowingly allowing Mexican drug-running criminals to purchase weapons in America while the gun store owners were saying, gosh, are you sure you want us to sell to these guys? I mean, doesn't sound like a good idea to us. And them being reassured, no, go ahead and sell them the guns. We want you to sell them the guns. We're going to follow the guns into Mexico and find out where they end up so we can bust these guys on on gun charges. And of course, they lose track of where the guns go, except for the fact that one of them turns up in a killing of an American Border Patrol officer. And now the Obama administration is playing CYA, cover your ass, as much as it can to try to avoid the scandal that it rightfully deserves to be pinned on Eric Holder's department. There's only two excuses for this. Either you didn't know what was going on, in which case you are incompetent, ineffective, and a poor manager and leader, or you did know what was going on, in which case you show shockingly bad judgment and a lack of knowledge of our constitutional and treaty obligations to the sovereign country of Mexico. Either way, Eric Holder has got to go.
A court case out of California delivers a blow to medical marijuana patients in the state, hoping to get some legal protection over obtaining their preferred medication. A panel of 3 judges in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco has ruled that the Americans with Disability Act does not protect the rights of disabled patients who are using medical marijuana, even if they are doing so under a doctor's care. The case was James versus the city of Costa Mesa, and it stemmed from a lawsuit filed by 4 severely disabled California residents of Costa Mesa and Lake Forest, California. They tried to sue the city that restricted dispensaries and made it impossible to get their medical marijuana. Many communities, including Costa Mesa and Lake Forest, have passed city ordinances that ban the sale of medical marijuana. Now, in defiance of the ban, several medical marijuana dispensaries remained open for years, but were more recently the subject of raids and closures, as well as an increasing amount of pressure from some citizens to enforce the ban and close any and all dispensaries in their area. Now, the 4 plaintiffs in the case sued, claiming they have the protection protection of the ADA, since the closure would mean that they would lose their source of medical marijuana. Title II of the ADA prohibits discrimination in the provision of public services to any qualified individual with a disability. The plaintiffs contend that the cities are in violation of the act based on their actions. The judges ruled in a split decision 2-1 that they did not have such protection. In their ruling, they stated, quote, "We recognize that the plaintiffs are gravely ill and that their request for ADA relief implicates not only their right to live comfortably, but also their basic human dignity. We also acknowledge that California has embraced marijuana as an effective treatment for individuals like the plaintiffs who face debilitating pain. Congress has made it clear, however, that the ADA defines illegal drug use by reference to federal rather than state law, and federal law does not authorize the plaintiff's medical marijuana use. We therefore necessarily conclude that the patient's medical marijuana use is not protected by the ADA."
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a well-worn path that's been tried in Washington, in Oregon, in California, in the state court level. Now that it's made it to the federal court level, we're getting exactly the same answer. Yes, we absolutely know that you're sick. Yes, you absolutely shouldn't be discriminated against because you're using medicine to treat your sickness. Yes, we recognize that California and these other states have come up with a way of treating marijuana as medicine and recognizing its medicinal use lawfully by its citizens. But unfortunately, the federal government still says,
drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. If you do them, you're bad. Because drugs are bad, okay?
So it really doesn't matter what we say as far as the Americans with Disabilities Act. Americans with Disability Act, federal law, marijuana, federally illegal drug. End of discussion. It doesn't matter how good our arguments are in the federal courts so long as the Controlled Substances Act mistakenly places marijuana in Schedule 1 alongside of heroin and PCP. We've seen this in Oregon. In the case in Oregon, when they tried to press the ADA issue, a very interesting decision here came down in the Oregon courts that basically said, well, because you use cannabis, and when you use cannabis, it makes you not as disabled, then you can't use the ADA. Because your treatment of it is like wearing eyeglasses. When you wear eyeglasses, the condition you have that makes you disabled, not being able to see, is remedied by the eyeglasses. So when you put the eyeglasses on, you're not disabled anymore. That's the actual argument our Oregon courts made when denying ADA relief to the patients here who are lawfully using marijuana as medicine. So once again, it just shows how pernicious this prohibition is and how far into our lives it reaches in every different way. We'll talk more about that during the Radical Rant. We'll also bring it into Hour 2 discussions.
And Democrat Bob Kerrey says it's time the nation considered allowing doctors to prescribe medical marijuana. That's right, the nation, especially to returning veterans with mental health issues. While Senator Kerrey said he doesn't support full legalization of marijuana, Kerrey says he does believe that returning veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or other mental trauma should be allowed to use marijuana as long as their doctors agreed it would help alleviate their symptoms. Kerrey said at the very least, the Department of Veterans Affairs should be allowed to study whether cannabis could help veterans returning from combat, as anecdotal evidence shows. Senator Kerrey would also like the conflicts between state and federal laws to be addressed. He said it might be time to explore the option of having the Food and Drug Administration, rather than the Drug Enforcement Administration, be the regulator of marijuana. But to clarify, he said that under no circumstances he's talking about legalizing marijuana to the point it can be purchased over the counter on street corners. Now, he was questioned by reporters over his friendship with billionaire Peter Lewis, who was given massive amounts of money to try and get marijuana legalized. Kerrey said that the friendship does not mean he supports legalization, that he has never advised Lewis on their efforts to pass any pro-cannabis laws. Now, Kerrey is running for the U.S. State Senate against Republican Deb Fischer. His views on marijuana have been raised and speculated on by Republicans, while his home state of Nebraska is mounting a legalization effort. Supporters are collecting signatures for a bill to legalize marijuana for private, non-commercial use in Nebraska, but it needs about 120,000 signatures by July 6th to make that ballot. Nebraska does not currently recognize medical marijuana as a legal option for medical therapies.
Well, folks, you know what I've always said. If you can carry a gun in the sand, you should have a joint in your hand, right? Any veteran coming back from serving our country, it should just be your DD-214 form. That should be your medical marijuana card, right? If you've gotten honorable discharge from the military anywhere in the United States, you should not be prosecuted for use of marijuana. I would think that's the least we can do for the people that put their lives on the line to protect our American freedoms. That said, I always find it weird when people like Bob Kerrey will recognize the medical use of marijuana for PTSI, By the way, I don't call it PTSD anymore. I call it PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. There is no disorder for your brain reacting the way it does when it's gone through a traumatic event like the horrors of war or being raped or attacked or something like that. It's a post-traumatic stress injury. You're not disordered. You're acting perfectly rationally for someone who suffered through that horror. But it always cracks me up when they say, oh, well, our vets, we should study it for our vets who are coming home. They suffered in war. It might do some good for them. But by God, we can't let that same person, if they haven't gone to war, buy a bag of buds over the counter, right? You have to have suffered. There has to be something wrong with you before we'll allow you to use marijuana. You have to have gone through war. You have to have cancer. You have to have AIDS. Something terribly wrong has had to happen to you. But we are here to tell you with National Cannabis Coalition and the Russ Belville Show that there doesn't have to be anything wrong with you to use marijuana. There just has to be something right with you to use.
It's 420 back in Idaho, where Russ and Carrie were born. So we have to go connect with our roots. You know what I mean? Please support these sponsors who support the Russ Belville Show.
All right, when we come back, we got some Daily Toker tunes. Ganja John's going to pull up some music for us, and we'll also talk about some future shows coming up on Thursday nights. A big announcement from Big Daddy Fink. All that and more coming up on the Russ Belville Show. Stick around. We'll be right back after this.
Know you talking to that reefer man.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa. Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at www.omarfigueroa.com.
Hotnet brings you the best in Daily Toker tunes every weekday. Each day features a different genre, including Roots Monday,
Folks, here's a story about Minnie the Moocher.
Electric Tuesday, Irie Wednesday,
Summer ganja planter, call me the ganja.
Groovin' Thursday,
Do you wanna get high?
and Rockin' Friday.
They'd like to hit the ball.
Then on weekends, we mix them all together in our weekend music party. Check potnet.us for airtimes. Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Groovin' Thursday, featuring rap, hip-hop, soul, and funk music. You can get downloads and more information about all our Daily Toker tunes by visiting music.radicalruss.com. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker tune.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, and time for some Daily Toker tunes to get your smoke on, too. We turn things over to Ganja John, the host of the Ganja John Show.
So we got some permission from Hieroglyphics and all of the artists who are in Hieroglyphics to play any of their music. That includes Del the Funky Homo Sapien.
Oh, yeah.
Who many of you may know as Ice-T's cousin, the dude who sang in that Gorillaz song. Or this song you may remember from, I think it was Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 is where I first heard it.
Oh, yeah, video game music.
Yeah. So without further ado, this is Del the Funky Homo Sapien with If You Must.
It's important to practice good hygiene. At least if you wanna run with my team. I'm about to get into some shit that I've seen. This fool's breath on it so that'll melt your ice cream. They say don't say nothing if you can say nice things. Sitting too close to him on board like my eye sting. I tried to be subtle, hand him a stick of gum. I was a victim of breath on hum. Running his yap about what set he from. Gotta get some gum, gotta get him some. He turned it down, his teeth was brown. Excruciating foreign, it was a new sensation. I had to ask the dope to pass the soap, cause his coat had the slips of crustaceans. Or bathrooms in the bus station. He had a can of OE and some raisins. Amazing, head to Tobio, he didn't know. Used to the fragrance, cause as the days went without bathing, he felt manly and not like a maiden. He had one dread and fungus. Said he worked on people's toilets with plungers. Girls, not the guy you would want to tongue, yeah. So guys, take your cue from this little number. You gotta wash your ass if you must. You gotta wash your hair if you must. You gotta brush your teeth if you must, or else you'll be funky. You gotta wash your ass if you must. You gotta wash your hair if you must. You gotta brush your teeth if you must, or else you'll be funky. Now in class you need total concentration, but there's kids in the back holding conversations, cracking on each other, and neither were poster boys. Both of them smell like the type that's overboard. Coast enjoy to leave an absence. One's food he smelled like his drugs some matchsticks. Brimstone, girls would never bring him home. I was laughing, then his friend raised his tone and said, yeah, I go so deep on your ass you'll be submerged like you need to do in water cause you smell like a turd. Want a cap, get some courage, your feet smell lurid. Go to get up, and while you at it, get a cup and squeeze the sweat out your sweatshirt and drink it or gargle. You get our vote for most stinkiest. That nigga started thinking of shit, said I was frail, I said he was stale. Underarms was ripe, undergarments hype, about to leap out your holy sweats. And we holding bets, and after this I'm gonna collect. Nigga, check yourself, respect yourself, and watch your motherfucking body for your sweatshirt melt like radioactive. No lady find you attractive, the folks got you captive. You don't need a map, bitch. You gotta wash your ass if you must. You gotta wash your hair if you must. You gotta wash your teeth if you must, or else you'll be funky. You gotta wash your ass if you must. You gotta wash your hair if you must. You gotta wash your teeth if you must, or else you'll be funky.
That's Del the Funky Soul Homies. Hard to say. That's Del the Funky Homo Sapien for our Groovin' Thursday tune. When we come back, we're speaking with Titus Peterson from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Stick around.
Have you ever wondered how to make the best tasting and most potent pot brownies possible? Do you consistently seek out recipes that will elevate your marijuana-infused cuisine to the highest levels imaginable? Then it's time to pick up a copy of the official High Times Cannabis Cookbook, published by the world's most trusted name when it comes to getting stoned. Packed tight with more than 50 recipes for irie appetizers, munchy meals, high holidays, stoner sweets, and cannabis cocktails, along with expert advice that demystifies the experience of infusing marijuana into butter, alcohol, and various oils. This book will get you cooking with grass in no time, with special treats inspired by Willie Nelson, Snoop Dogg, and Cheech and Chong, plus all the info you need to stay safe when making and consuming edibles. You will truly learn how to bake a ganja cake and eat it too. So look for the official High Times Cannabis Cookbook wherever finer books.
The Cure with Georgia and Amy. Responsible talk about ending prohibition, courtesy of iCannabisRadio.com. Cannabinoids and health.
Cannabinoids.
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 Why am I having trouble saying that?
Cannabinoids.
Jeez.
Cannabinoids.
What a goof.
Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed. Fire it up.
Belville Show reminds you to never smoke and drive impaired. Hang out for a while and share.
This day was hard and your work was long and you need a break from all that's wrong. You better look at the clock cause it's 4:19. Time to reach in that pocket for your bag of green and smoke that weed.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show.
Smoke that.
One of the most disturbing elements of the Prohibition War is how it's made police the enemy of otherwise law-abiding cannabis consumers. Fortunately, one group of police officers knows the futility of prohibition and reaches out to educate the community and current law enforcement. Today, the Russ Belville Show visits with another speaker from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition with one clear message. Cops say legalize drugs.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Radical Russ here, coming to you from Rolla J Studios in Portland, Oregon. And on the first and third Thursdays, we've switched it. On the first and third Thursdays, we bring you Cops Say Legalize Drugs, which is speakers from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, former prosecutors, attorneys, police, prison guards, etc., judges, and so on, who all have decided that the war on drugs and that the prohibition war here is a failure and it needs to end. And they have got a great speakers bureau. You can find them by going to leap.cc. They have speakers all over the United States and, in fact, some international speakers as well. So if you need someone for your event to explain about the prohibition war and why we need to legalize drugs, and somebody who comes to it from a law enforcement background that's virtually unassailable from our opposition's point of view, contact Leap at leap.cc or copssaylegalizedrugs.com. Joining us by telephone to talk about the need to legalize drugs is Titus Peterson. He is a former felony prosecutor in Denver, Colorado. Titus, welcome to the Russ Belville Show.
Hello, how are you?
Doing really good. So glad to have you here. And we understand that you're fairly new to LEAP, just joined the organization. And what was it in your career that convinced you that the Prohibition War was a failure and you needed to speak up with LEAP?
Oh, there's just a lot of different things. As you were talking, I was remembering this one conference they had where they gathered all the prosecutors from all over Colorado, and they had this speaker talking about how we all needed to really close ranks and support the war on drugs because at this point it was things were falling to pieces in Colombia, and that there were people dying because of the drug consumption here. And I just sat there and saw this scary guy running around saying these things and thinking, wow, the reason why everybody's getting killed is because we are making this illegal. And it was as if the crazy people were in charge, and anybody who would say anything, the entire audience, there were probably 2,000 of us there, and everybody was terrified to say anything in the face of this wild emperor who was marching up and down, rabid, foaming at the mouth about this. And yet, I just knew he didn't make any sense, and that, we were fighting such vast amounts of ignorance. But where this goes really is, I ran my own office. I wasn't the elected DA. I was the appointed DA for a county in ski country, Colorado. And we were making money, really, that was how we funded our office, by supporting the war on drugs. And we had people who wrote grants and people who administered them and people who went out to talk to kids in the schools. And it was like a religion. It was the state supporting this this kind of craziness. And, it was all self-serving. The people who got elected on it, and then, we all supported that. And so, I just began to really feel as if, this whole thing had to stop. And, I'm just thankful for LEAP because I have felt alone for many years, as if there's no place really to talk about this. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I'm really thankful for that, and I'm thankful for you because the word needs to get out. I mean, whether you're, somebody who doesn't like big government, I think there's a place for you under the let's end the drug war, or you're somebody who believes that these are shamanic substances and that they have the right to do something with their own body, that it's their body, that those people also support it. So I feel like, somehow there needs to be this sort of closing of ranks across the political spectrum around this issue, and we could move forward. And maybe I'm a bit of I believe in utopia, but I think that things would really begin to change in society with that sort of, whether it's the size of government or the attitudes that people have about each other. If the the war on drugs came to an end. So,
you mentioned
that's my thing in a bottle.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that's very compelling to me in talking about how you're in a room with hundreds or thousands of fellow law enforcers, and there's that culture of go along to get along, don't rock the boat, be a good soldier, that kind of feeling in there that prevents officers and law enforcers and prosecutors from speaking out when they can see with their own damn eyes, what's going on here with this prohibition war. So what do you think is the biggest thing that's blocking them from speaking out and making a change here?
I think it was fear for me. I mean, I sat there and felt as if I couldn't really speak up. And I don't know why I felt so disempowered there, but I felt as if it would affect my career, or I would be looked down upon, or I would be singled out, or maybe, I don't know. I mean, it had a definite feeling of a witch hunt to it, where, similar to, in the times of the Pilgrims or whatever, where, there's craziness going on, but somehow you don't want to be the one to point it out because they might point the finger at you or something. I mean, it had that feeling to it. And I do think there's a lot of money involved in the war on drugs. I don't want to underestimate that. And then, I can't tell you how much money we got in our own office. So to begin to talk against it was to maybe attack some of the funding that your office got. And I think that goes through everything. I mean, here in Colorado, the governor tried to shut down just one prison, because we don't need all the prisons we have, and he couldn't do that. And so I have to think that on some level, there's a group of people who sort of unite under this umbrella of let's control what everybody else does with their body, whether it be reproductive rights or gay rights or who you can marry or what you can do, that those people combine with the people who need to lock people up for not conforming, because that's where their livelihood is, and that somehow they sort of intuitively know each other, and then. But I'm really at a sort of a loss. I mean, I'm trying to figure all this out myself as I get older. I'm like, what is the deal with everybody needing to control everybody else? Why can't they just be happy controlling themselves?
Yeah.
But, that doesn't seem to be, where we are. I mean, I think we're evolving as a species, but you're talking about a real reactionary forces. I mean, why does anybody care about a lot of things other people do with their bodies?
Well, we're speaking with Titus Peterson. He's a former lead felony prosecutor with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Visit the website at leap.cc. And you mentioned the amount of money that comes into your office doing prosecution that have to do with both grants from the federal government to go after drug criminals, and then the asset forfeiture that can be used to seize the assets of alleged drug criminals, even without convicting them of a crime. Do you feel that is deterring our efforts and retarding our efforts from fighting real crime, theft, rape, arson, and so forth?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it distracts people from who work in law enforcement from being able to focus on real crimes. I mean, that's clear. You have to meet certain numbers. It's like any sort of business. When you're a prosecutor, you have to try a certain number of cases. And, some of the easiest cases to try are, simple hippies who, are probably the most like Jesus anybody's ever met, who get caught with some, marijuana in their pocket, and there's not a big defense to that. And once you get past that, they were legally stopped and frisked under sort of, what's happened with the Supreme Court. So you have to meet your numbers to get your grants. And so that's a lot. Those cases are oftentimes a lot easier to pursue than, who's really breaking into these houses, or, who this sort of serial rapist might be. I mean, those all involve a lot of footwork. It's not simply, let's stop somebody who looks like they might be using what's considered an illegal substance, and then we just, kind of paper up a reason to stop them, and then we do this. I mean, you can meet your numbers a lot easier that way. So, and there is that aspect of seizing property. I mean, I have a client right now who's, going to lose $24,000. And there's really nothing to be done about that. You just have to keep your mouth shut. And I honestly feel like even if you raise your voice about that, it's going to affect how you're treated in the rest of the criminal system.
Sure.
So, there's a lot of sort of pressure coming back. I actually feel as if in Colorado, because we have dispensaries now, and there's some ability to raise money legitimately out of the use of what I consider shamanic substances, that there's some ability to fight back, but otherwise the money is all on locking people up. I mean, there's money to be made there. It's a business model, and so when you don't have any ability to really address that, and you have crazy people, there's been so much indoctrination about all of this. I mean, we grew up watching like eggs fried in pans on television.
Right.
Like things that are just out and out lies that they've scared people to death with.
This is your brain on drugs. To me, it kind of looks like breakfast, but okay, whatever. Hey, Titus, we got time for one last question here to wind up this segment. I just wanted to get some, I was looking at your bio, and, one of the things our opponents always bring up when we talk about legalizing drugs is, what about the children? So can you tell us, as a prosecutor, as someone who's been in this system, what this war on drugs and these grants and this policing do as far as breaking up families?
Yeah, that was one of the most tragic things, I think, is that, what happened, at least in the counties that I worked in, is that you funded actually drug officers, DARE officers, to go in and speak to kids, and then they would tell kids how horrible these drugs were. And they would get the kids to basically narc on their parents, with the idea, telling the kids that if they narked on their parents and told about what their parents would do, that they could help their parents. And then, of course, show them, whatever was the version of the eggs frying in the pan. So the kids would do that. Then social services would get involved. Then the kids would be taken out of the home, and then they'd be put in another home. And the parents then would have to, prove that they weren't doing drugs, or else they would be convicted and sent to prison. And it was, how disingenuous is that, to have done that, to tear people apart, to ruin children's lives through this process? Horrific. Someday I think they'll read stories about this. It's like, Charles Dickens sort of stories. Somebody should write those stories about what goes on.
Yeah.
It was horrific to watch this, and literally there was little you could do, because you had the prosecution side, you had the county attorney side. It was crazy, and the kids didn't know anything. They thought, here's a policeman, and probably their parents, because they were good parents, said, if you're ever in trouble, you listen to the police and you do all this stuff, and blah, 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 blah. Little did they know that they were going to end up, basically having their lives destroyed and their children taken away. And that was probably one of the biggest tragedies I ever saw. And it happened repeatedly. I'm not sure. I don't know to the extent it's happening now, because I'm not involved with that, but that was one of the things we raised money for.
Yeah, it's still going on, and I'm telling you, Titus Peterson from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, we could talk about that part of this prohibition war for a long time, but I got to wrap up the segment. So before we go, if people want to get in touch with you or have you come down to speak to them, what's the best way to contact you?
Best way is probably to call me at my office, which is 303-260-6412. That's my office. I actually practice law in Denver. So call me at that, or you can, that's probably the best place to go.
Right.
Or else you can send me a letter at 600 17th Street, Suite 2800, Denver, Colorado. So that's the best way to get hold of me. And anybody who wants me to talk to them, or share stories with me, that would be terrific. So.
All right, folks, this interview is available through podcast or at our YouTube channel at youtube.com/RadicalRuss. So if you missed those numbers or address, you can go back and replay them and write them down and get in touch with Titus Peterson from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Visit the website at leap.cc. And Titus, thanks for joining us here on the Russ Belville Show. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Darby pirates here. Har, 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 har. The Pirate King. You know why we pirates love the normal show? Har, har. 'Cause it's always smoking matey. Har, 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 har.
This is Normal Show Live.
To be the Pirate King.
Don't touch that dial. Radical Russ and the Rolla J Studios crew will be right back after these messages. Does internet radio even have a dial? Guys? This is the Russ Belville Show.
Marijuana and alcohol are the two most popular recreational drugs in America. Marijuana smoking is non-toxic, relatively safe, and has a low risk of dependence. Alcohol drinking is potentially fatal, dangerous to society, and is quite addictive. Marijuana is safer, so why are we driving people to drink? That's the question of the new book, Marijuana is Safer, So Why Are We Driving People to Drink? By Paul Armentano, Mason Tvert, and Steve Fox. Visit Amazon.com or ChelseaGreen.com today to order your copy of Marijuana is Safer, or visit MarijuanaIsSafer.com.
The Russ Belville Show, where we don't change our position on decriminalization in an election year.
You want answers? I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
All right, folks, yesterday I told you a little bit about a post that was written by Chaz Pazienza on the Huffington Post marijuana section. You can find it by going to huffingtonpost.com/marijuana/news, and it's in the blog sections on the left. And I replied to it, and he's actually replied to my reply. So we've got a bit of a dialogue going on here with Chaz Pazienza, and I'll address that here in just a second. Now, let me get to what the tone of his article was. It was basically saying that those of us who are fighting for marijuana legalization need to get over ourselves. It's not the most important thing in the world. If you're basing your decision on who to vote for president on their stance on marijuana legalization, you're an idiot, and that it's not as big a deal. You folks just want to get high. It's not really about, all these other things. So I just wanted to address that because I am the epitome of the marijuana legalization movement that he's mocking and demeaning in this post. By the way, it's called Reefer Madness, if you want to look it up. He seems to think that those of us that are fighting for an end to the war on certain American citizens using non-pharmaceutical, non-alcoholic, tobacco-free drugs are just, unabashed hedonists, that we're hiding behind some lofty rhetoric to get our wacky tobacco legal so we can get doped up in peace. Let me quote to you from his piece, just a few relevant pieces from Chez Pazienza. A couple of weeks back, though, Bob Cheska and I had a little debate going on our podcast and radio show about the merits, or lack thereof in my opinion, of the culture of marijuana. The movement full of people who basically take the diametrically opposed side of the argument to those who feel that pot is the devil's weed, mythologizing it rather than castigating it, claiming that it heals all wounds and has near magical properties that can be used in the service of mankind if only the close-minded politicians would just give it a chance. Here's my issue with the marijuana culture, the fight to gain the national acceptance of pot, beyond the fact that a hell of a lot of people use it or have used it at one point in their lives. It's for the most part disingenuous. For God's sake, be honest about why you like weed. You like to get high. That hemp is beneficial to mankind and I need it as medicine horseshit is exactly that, horseshit. So, Pazienza goes to great lengths in this piece to actually indicate that he does want to see marijuana legalized. He accepts that it does have medicinal properties and that hemp is an amazingly valuable crop for its myriad of industrial uses. He even posits that it's none of the government's damn business to police the habits of citizens so long as they're doing no harm to others. So why this vitriol toward those of us who are trying to get marijuana legalized? It seems to me that marijuana legalization is the only civil rights issue in America where it's still acceptable to mock the oppressed by questioning the selfish motives of those fighting for equality. Can you imagine the uproar if Pazienza were questioning the motives of those fighting for acceptance of equal marriage rights for gay people by observing, "Oh, you just like to get laid, and it's very likely nothing more noble than that. Admit it." Or if Pazienza had castigated a woman fighting for health insurance coverage of birth control by saying, "Oh, she just wants you and me and the taxpayers to pay her to have sex." Or imagine if Pazienza had demeaned those fighting against the English-only laws by saying, "Oh, they're just too lazy to learn English." Yes, indeed, many people who support marijuana legalization just want to get high, without having the police, clad in body armor and toting automatic weapons, breaking down their doors in the middle of the night, throwing flashbang grenades into their living room, and shooting 7 times inside their homes, killing our family pets while our children are asleep in the next room. Gee, how disingenuous of them to want an end to all of that, just because they like to smoke weed. Now, certainly, many of the people that are getting their medical marijuana recommendations in California are doing so to treat arrest anxiety syndrome. Pazienza seems to think that, oh, California, anyone can get a card, so what's the big deal? Why are you fighting all that? But really, who wouldn't take the opportunity to avoid arrest, incarceration, and seizure of their assets for the crime of choosing to get wasted on a drug whose advertisements don't fund Super Bowl telecasts and is far safer to use? But Pazienza seems to think that's the case in the other 16 medical marijuana states where, in fact, it takes a whole lot of medical documentation to qualify under an extremely limited set of medical conditions. Part of the reason that medical use is limited in the 16 other states and forbidden in the rest is because people like Pazienza, who seem to understand the need to end prohibition, but they mock the people who are fighting for that important, necessary, and admirable work. Pazienza demands that legalization proponents abandon the larger societal points regarding the devastation of prohibition and base their arguments on the single selfish right to get high without government interference. Well, okay, Ches, you got me. I like to smoke pot and I don't want to be put in a cage over it. You're right. My motivation is extremely personal. Kind of like how a black man marching with Dr. King in the early 1960s probably had a very personal motivation to not be fire-hosed, attacked by police dogs, or lynched by rednecks. Probably like how a gay man protesting in the 1980s probably had a really personal motivation to not die from HIV while a president was ignoring the epidemic. Or even maybe like how a student is protesting with Occupy these days, and he probably doesn't have any big noble intentions of changing the world, but maybe he just wants to be at the center of some public civil disobedience just for the kicks of it. But regardless of the personal motivations, regardless of how it impacts you personally, that does not make the societal cause any less just or the people fighting for it any less noble. Whether you're the twirling hippie at the Hemp Fest for the high, or the suit and tie activist at the Hemp Fest for the chance to organize voters, standing up to fight injustice still carries the same personal consequences. Because I like to get high on marijuana, and I proclaim so openly, and I fight for the same rights that beer drinkers have, I'm going to be discriminated against in hiring, housing, and many other aspects of daily life. Few corporate employers are going to look past my dirty pee test because I happen to be cognizant of the greater devastation of global cannabis prohibition. To them, I'm just a guy who breaks the law and their drug-free workplace policy. Look, marijuana prohibition in America has contributed to the torturous murders of over 50,000 Mexicans and the terrorization and destabilization of Latin America. It has denied to our farmers our heritage crop of hemp that could ease many of the environmental and energy problems of this nation. It has contributed to the suffering of millions by denying them the safest therapeutically active substance known to man. It has enriched criminals, gangs, and terrorists, and imprisoned mothers and fathers whose only crime was choosing marijuana over martinis, Marlboros, or Midol. All these things are true, even if the tattooed, pierced dreadlock kid protesting at the marijuana march for a solution to it all just wants to get high. The right to one's own consciousness and to one's own self is the most personal of civil rights. This isn't about just getting high. This is about who has the jurisdiction over my brain and my body. If a woman has the right to do with her uterus as she pleases, why is it any less right for me to do with my brain and lungs what I choose? Look, whether the woman uses the morning after birth control pill because of an honest mistake and a sincere desire to prevent an unwelcome pregnancy, or because she's a careless nymphomaniac with 6 abortions in her past, that's irrelevant. We recognize she has a right to control her own body. So whether I'm fighting for my civil right to be as stoned as a beer drinker because I'm trying to commit police resources toward actual crimes, or because I simply prefer a marijuana buzz, it's irrelevant. I'm fighting for a just cause. Oh, and one final thought, Ches. You seem like a reasonable guy, so try to understand that what you see as the movement, when you see all the hippies and the tie-dye and the hemp fests and all that kind of stuff, what you're railing against is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are 26 million people in America who will consume marijuana this year. About 17 million of them this month. About 2.5 million of them are consumers just like me and John who use marijuana almost every day. The movement that you see is the tip of the iceberg. The people who have nothing to lose by being out of the closet for ending marijuana prohibition. Either they're in the alternative crowd, or they've got artistic jobs or low-wage jobs or professional jobs even that don't care about what is in their urine or what they're doing on the weekends. Or they're the professional activists like me whose job it is to be all about ending prohibition. What you don't see that's the biggest part of the movement is that silent majority who can lose their careers, their kids, their assets, their businesses, their friends, their family for espousing an end to this stupid war on drugs. Because they've got to be silent. They've got to be in the closet. They've got to be hidden for their own self-preservation. That's the most insane part of this fight for our civil rights, this fight that we're all a part of, is the fact that being illegal makes it hard to change the laws. It's really hard to change the laws that put you down when you get a felony and you lose your right to vote on that issue. You don't see that part of the movement. The people who are sincere, hardworking, tax-paying American citizens who don't, for 420, for them just means 40 more minutes at work, right? They're not the 420 crowd. They're not the tie-dyes and the dreadlocks and the piercings and the tattoos. They're the average moms and dads, the workers, the teachers, the firefighters, the cops, the bankers, the business owners, the nuns and the fathers and the priests who can't mention that they want to see an end to marijuana prohibition. And furthermore, you assume that everybody who's fighting against this actually is fighting it for their personal want to get high. Sure, there's a lot of us that like to get high, but we were getting high already. We didn't have to tell anybody we were getting high. We didn't have to go out in public and sign petitions and put forth videos on YouTube and radio shows and all that. We didn't have to come out on the streets with big signs that say, I smoke pot and I like it a lot. We didn't have to do that. We were already getting high. We're already finding plenty of marijuana, already doing what we want to do. We didn't have to put our lives, our families, our reputations at risk to stand up for this. We're standing up for it because it's the right damn thing to do. And don't forget that there's a lot of people on our side, a lot of people, for example, law enforcement against prohibition, who've never taken a drug in their life, who've never even drank alcohol in their life. People like the comedian and magician Penn Jillette, who's never used a substance in his life, but still recognizes the futility of trying to stop adults from doing what they want to do so long as they're not harming others. We're going to continue this conversation in hour 2 in Toker Talk Radio. I got plenty more to say because Ches Pazienza actually replied to me. I'll give you some of his reply and then some of my retort to that. Coming up in Toker Talk Radio, hour 2 of the Russ Belville Show, available as a subscription podcast. Just visit ttr.radicalruss.com for hour 2. Or if you're just listening live, stay tuned. We're back with more right after this. For Ganja John and Cannabis Carry, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it.